Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Topic. I'm Alex.
I'm Dan, and this week I'm actually coming to you from all the way in the Emerald Isles, Youghal in Ireland.
He is in Southern Ireland, no doubt. And we are making full use of technology. And we're being challenged, Dan, aren't we, in terms of IT. Windows hasn't allowed us to do updates and the likes. But we're here today. It's fine. And we're going to bring you an absolutely awesome episode on the topic of Jurassic Park. Now, you could say, well, Alex, you guys have done this before. And you could be quite correct. But what we're going to be doing, I will put a link in the description below about what we covered in the past. But today, we're going to be talking about the magic of behind the scenes, aren't we, Dan?
We are. I mean, we've already done our film review of the classic 1993 episode. But this time, we're actually going to delve a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about casting, effects, how sound effects were created. I've got some fun facts as well, which I'm going to sort of throw at you. Hopefully things that you probably wouldn't necessarily know. And I'm actually going to destroy your childhoods with a fact on one of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that bit. Well, for our listeners, of course, I already know what you're going to do, and you're going to destroy people's dreams. But yeah, I mean, before we get into it, you've had a revelation, haven't you, Dan, in the Emerald Isles of Southern Ireland?
Oh, yes. So it turns out my other half's niece has never seen Jurassic Park. So tonight, she's going to get an education in pop culture. And we're going to get Netflix on the go. And we're going to make her watch it.
And
It's got to be done.
Even if she doesn't enjoy it, she's got to sit all the way through those, whatever it is, 2 hours of glorious cinematic history. And hopefully the answer is she has enjoyed it. But it's still going to happen regardless. But the good thing is this will drop afterwards, so she can watch the film, and then she can then have her dreams dashed afterwards as we go behind the scenes. So with that in mind, Dan, I am going to kick off, and I think I've got about 8 or 9 different things, and I think you've got a couple to spare as well. So I'm going to kick off, Dan, with the T-Rex.
Good old Rexy.
Good old Rexy. He's literally the star of the show. I don't think there's any Jurassic Park which hasn't featured this monstrosity, which ends up being, I guess, a positive figure. I think in the more recent films, it helps out from time to time when there's the big bad genetically modified dinosaurs are tearing apart Isla Nublar, and we go all the way back to the beginning. And in order to kind of understand how it ended up on the big screen, you've got to look back at the 1986 James Cameron film Aliens. Now, Aliens, you say, well, what has that Aliens got to do with dinosaurs? And be fair enough. But it turns out that actually, when Spielberg had seen Aliens, he said, you know what? I want to do whatever you've done for the Xenomorph, which is the alien. I want you, whatever you've done for that, I want to do for Jurassic Park, but bigger. I think it's going to be so much more engaging. I don't want to do CGI. I think it's all about animatronics. But of course, when you develop a giant T-Rex for the film, it's going to be a major challenge, right? So one of their creative inputs, Matt Winston has said that, I haven't done anything like this before on this scale. He said, although the other dinosaurs were incredibly impressive, to build a 40-foot long puppet, which is effectively what it was, had never been done before. And that's exactly the job I quite like.
It's no mean feat, is it?
It's not. It's gigantic. But apparently, as they started to build the T-Rex in the workshop, they realised they needed a bigger space. So apparently, Stan Winston said, we can raise the roof. We can also make the door bigger to get it in and out the other end. And apparently, they're going to have to modify the building which it was built in because it's just too big. And they said, you felt like you're really in the middle of something special, sculpting a dinosaur. Not many people in the world have done that. So in the end, the T-Rex ended up being 36 feet long and 18 feet tall and weighed around 12,000 pounds. But because of the fact they already started the work and so much money being pumped into it, they actually had to change the building in order to accommodate getting in and out and building the scale. So when you're looking at the film, it's a monstrosity, but it really is in reality. I mean, I've got a couple more things in terms of a T-Rex. I think, Dan, you touch on, I think, one of the same interesting quirks of how you keep a animatronic going in a tropical storm. But all things aside, it was no mean feat, and the star of the show really did need that extra kind of TLC to get it to actually be built in the first place. So it had never been done before. It was a mammoth task, but I think it's fair to say, Dan, we all are thankful they did that and the extra bit of building work, because it looked fantastic on the screen, and is one of the most iconic, scenes in movie history, I think, when it features a T-Rex.
It's iconic. I mean, whenever you think of Jurassic Park, you always think of Rexy. But I mean, they had their problems, right, when they were essentially filming with this 36 monster. I mean, I'm going to put a disclaimer in, because one source says only the Triceratops made it to Hawaii. But I mean, of course, there was a hurricane during the production. So it was shot on Hawaii's. Do you know what? I don't know why I put things in my notes that I can't pronounce. Kauai Island.
That was
Hurricane Aniki, the most powerful hurricane to hit Hawaii in recorded history at the time, I guess. Whether they've had anything stronger since, I don't know. It actually hit during filming. Fun fact for you: apparently Attenborough slept through the worst of it, and when Spielberg met this with disbelief, Attenborough said, "Dear boy, I survived the Blitz." But anyway, back to Rexy. So, of course, you've got the scene where Rexy's being filmed in the rain and he's attacking the Jeeps. Now, the skin is actually made of thick foam latex, which covers the entire body, and it was prone to shrinkage. So every time they had to bring it back in, they had to dry it off with towels and hair dryers. But it wasn't just the skin, Alex. It was the animatronics and all the mechanics that went a bit crazy, I guess. The head would start to droop, shake due to the additional weight, and it was just a nightmare for those operating it during key scenes. But it would come to life. It would come to life when they were just having lunch. So I've got a couple of quotes here. Producer Kathleen Kennedy said, "We'd be like eating lunch, and all of a sudden a T-Rex would come to life. At first, we didn't know what was happening, and then we realised it was the rain. You'd hear people start screaming."
Just imagine that you're on set, right? You're tucking into your set lunch. Don't know what it is. What they have on set. Salads. Let's go with salads. All healthy, aren't they? All Hollywood. You're tucking into your salad and your water, and suddenly things starts creaking, or might start letting out a growl or a roar. You shit yourself, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. Second quote is from John Rosengrant. We found out not long before we were going to shoot that it was going to be raining in the scene. So it went from this beautifully tuned machine that worked fantastically to suddenly the foam rubber skin started absorbing water, and now all the calculations were off and it started to shudder. So unfortunately, this great, beautiful 36-foot, 18-foot high machine that worked brilliantly is essentially causing you problems.
Indeed. And I think to that end, they actually had a team of people who their sole job was to dry out the T-Rex, because it wasn't waterproofed. And they said, lots of long nights with blow dryers and fans drying it out and squeezing it out. And they said, it was nuts. After the shot was done, everyone would run to the T-Rex and start mopping it off with towels. There was a night shift, they said, that would come in to continue the process of drying the T-Rex, so we'd be ready for the next day, which is insane. So I'm not sure if these poor guys would be credited for the end of the scene. And Dan, you can have a look, perhaps when the credits roll this evening when you watch it, whether there's someone credited with mopping the T-Rex, because that's a thankless task, but it's one which without that it would be uncontrollable, right? In the scenes, it'd be doing its own thing with the water. So it's a really important job. But when you sign up to do Hollywood, I bet it isn't to mop the brow of a T-Rex, that's for sure.
No, definitely not.
So just finishing off in terms of T-Rex, Dan. The crew, because of all these challenges and just so how issue filled it was, the crew had to have a safety meeting to discuss just how to avoid T-Rex specific injuries. Now, as I mentioned before, it weighed around 12,000 pounds, but some say even 13 or 15. So if anyone got stuck under it or fell, I mean, it would be pretty much daylight, I think. Now, they said that, Alan Scott said that he had to actually put the skin on, glue it down from the inside, and sew it all up once we were there. Now, that what I've said, that infers that someone actually had to get inside it. So I'm not sure if you knew about this.
Blimey.
But
no, I didn't.
Yeah. So someone actually had to get inside. So they said that the skins were so long, you could only reach in a couple of feet from either end. And so there was a whole section in the middle that you could only glue down by crawling into the armature. It had to be done in the sculpted position too, so the T-Rex had to be powered up and held in that pose. Now, this guy volunteered for the job, apparently climbing inside the rig with a bucket of glue and a brush, which sounds
nuts.
A bit ill-advised. Now, he said that if the power was shut off for any reason, the head would move from its powered up position to its powered down, and all the hydraulic cylinders and sheets of metal inside would move. Okay, so as I'm crawling inside this thing, he says, I said to the guy on the controls, don't shut it down and make sure nobody trips on the cord. I'm going to go inside. If this thing moves with all those hydraulics inside, I'm dead. Okay, so we've already set the scene. I think the listener and you, Dan, already know where I'm going to go with this. So anyway, he gets in and the power goes out in the entire studio. So suddenly, he says, I can hear the hydraulics stop and the power start to go down. And I can hear a muffled shout from outside. There's someone in the T-Rex. Now, he says, all I could think about is those big hydraulic cylinders and the giant metal sheets shearing across each other with me inside the middle of it. So what do you do, Dan? What would you do if you're in the middle of a T-Rex and the one thing that shouldn't happen happens? What do you do?
I'd probably start punching a hole through the latex skin just to sort of fall out.
Oh, so it's a fight or flight complex. We know which one you're going to be adhering to. So that's a good shout. Expensive one, as it turns out. But no, this guy, he pulled his. Well, he says, I pulled my hands and legs in as tight to my chest as I could, and just stayed like that, hoping, Dan. He said, hoping no part of my body would get caught in all that moving metal.
Oh, I mean, man,
that is just hoping for the best, isn't it? He said, it wasn't until I came out, it came to a complete rest, that I realised I wasn't going to get hurt. The head dropped down until the nose was a couple of feet from the ground, and 3 or 4 guys pried open the jaw and pulled me out. So if it wasn't enough that this guy crawled into the belly and taped it up, the power goes out, and he ends up having to escape out of the mouth of this massive T-Rex. But you literally could not, make this stuff up. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong, and a man lost his life. And if that would have happened, I mean, I don't know if the film would have ever seen light of day, right? I mean, sadly, people have, and indeed do, lose their lives in production as a result, either directly or otherwise. And it does call into question whether you can continue, to do the filming of that piece. But thankfully, it didn't come to that, and everything was fine, Dan. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he also wasn't mentioned on the credits as for being the guy to crawl out the T-Rex's mouth.
Damn. I mean, that's not the only accident that nearly happened with Rexy. Did you know that there was, in the Jeep attack scene, that there was a part that actually happens by accident?
Do tell.
Well, I mean, you already know how heavy this thing is, right? If we go back a few minutes, you mentioned it was what, 1,200?
12,000 pounds.
12,000 pounds. Well, when Rexy attacks Lex and Tim, who's played by Joe Mazzello, in the Jeep with only the plexiglass that protects them, and it comes crashing down on them. And
there's a scene where they're in between, like there's a sandwich between the car, the plexiglass, and this T-Rex gaping jaws.
Yeah, so Joe Mazzello told Entertainment Weekly back in 2013 that the scene wasn't supposed to go down that way. So everything you see is actually genuinely real.
No way.
So he says this. we were in that car, and I think the T-Rex was only supposed to go down so far, and the plexiglass was the only thing between the dinosaur and us, he reminisces. The pair were so startled by the incident that their screams were genuine, shrieks that were so loud that Spielberg elected to keep them in the final cut. Also, while pushing down on the plexiglass, not only did the T-Rex break the glass, but it also lost a tooth getting stuck in the metal of the car.
Did.
And I guess that's probably down to the wear and tear from all the water.
Well, is that or the poor kid decides to boot off the tooth because he wasn't expecting it to come down inches from his face. But we've talked about this before, Dan, haven't we? About, iconic scenes which are purely by accident. And again, I'll talk about another one in a sec. But, in Die Hard, now bear with me, listener. I know where you're going with this. You're going to say Alex down the rabbit hole. But no, we talked about this, didn't we, Dan, in our favourite 90s films, I think it was? No.
Yeah, it would have been. Or
action films.
Blimey.
Or villains.
All-time favourite films? I can't remember.
It's
it might have been
all-time
villains.
favourite films or villains. It's one of those. I think it was villains because there's Alan Rickman, who's the baddie of the first Die Hard film, and Hans Gruber. And he's at the very end. I'm not spoiling it, guys. It's been out for like 30 years, so I make no apologies. And as he's hanging out the skyscraper, the Nakatomi Plaza, as it's known, and he's about to fall to his death, the director is to do a countdown, Dan, right? And he goes 3, 2, 1. Right, Alan, I'm going to drop you. But to get the actual kind of real life horror in his eyes and his face, it's quite a height that he's going to be dropped from, obviously with a soft bag underneath. He goes 3, 2, and drops him. So, of course, Alan Rickman's got the pure look of horror on his face in the film because actually he wasn't expected to be dropped on 2 as opposed to 1. And no doubt exactly what's happened here in the T-Rex scene is the poor kid actor wasn't expecting the T-Rex to get that close. But I think it made for like a really iconic scene, right? It did give you the sense of peril. And with the animatronics just being so on point, albeit perilous, it actually topped off, which was really quite an awesome scene.
100%. Like I say, some of the best things happen by accident, right?
They do. Well, on that note, Dan, if we just rewind 5 minutes previous from that scene, just before it all kicks off, can you remember in the film, bit of a silly question, but how can you remember in the film how this all starts off? Before T-Rexy comes bursting out of the metal non-powered lines and out of the jungle, how do they know that it's on its way? Do you remember?
Wow. I'll recount everything sort of in short. So our bad boy Dennis Nedry, he's turned the power off. He's legging it with some DNA, isn't he?
Laddie
Nedry. And jeeps have stopped. Thunder and lightning. Rain just pouring down. And then boom. Boom. And you've got the cup. And you've got the old blood-sucking lawyer in the Jeep. He looks up,
yeah.
and he's like, "Maybe it's the power coming back on." Oh no, son! It's not the power coming back on. It's Rexy, and you got the cup, and it's just little ripples of water.
Good.
It's iconic.
It is, and that's what I was going to talk about, Dan. Do you know how they made the water make that kind of rippled effect?
I do. I've got a bit of a backstory to it as well, but seeing as you're sort of talking about, I'll let you go ahead. I know it's inspired by listening to Earth, Wind and Fire.
It is, yeah. So you can fill in any gaps. But yeah, Steven Spielberg was inspired by it because he apparently noticed when he was driving in his rearview mirror that it was shaking when he was listening to Earth, Wind and Fire in his car. But when he said to the filmmaker, he said, "Look, guys, I think this would be really cool to emulate. I want to do it in something I want to reflect. Choose a glass of water." They couldn't really easily recreate it. Now, apparently, one of the special dinosaur effects people apparently finally figured out when he was playing on his guitar. Apparently, he discovered a particular note or frequency that actually caused the water to ripple. Apparently, a special rig was used using a guitar string to be able to create that effect. So what you're actually seeing is a musical instrument, and I guess they would have drowned out the actual audio from that video file, and put over the top the banging and the sound and thudding of the T-Rex. But yeah, this all came about as a result of a rock band, Dan.
It's just incredible, isn't it? Just little things like that. I mean, I didn't know a lot of the magic that goes behind this film until we started researching this episode. It's just so clever.
Oh, really?
I mean, I know you're probably going to sort of touch on how the dinosaur roars and stuff were created, but I know how Rexy's footsteps were created. It was the sound of falling trees.
Oh, was it?
It was, yeah. Fun little fact in there.
That's really cool. So, you studied this at university, Dan. What's the thing where you make sound effects for film or for audio?
It's called Foley.
That's it,
Foley.
It's cool, isn't it?
I did a small assignment where we had to create something. I went outside with a microphone. I recorded the rain, I had puddles and stuff like that. And to create the effect of a thunderstorm or the rumble, I got my friend sort of lightly bang on a piano and get a bit louder. And then you sort of almost distort it a little bit to make it sort of sound like a distant rumble. It's clever stuff. I mean, I'm not that clever, do you know what I mean? But some of the stuff these people create are phenomenal, especially when you look at how they created Rexy's roar, which I'm sure you've probably got some notes on, right?
I haven't covered that one off specifically, Dan. No. Do you know how they've done it?
I do. So the sound design of the T-Rex's roar was reportedly a composite of tiger, alligator, and baby elephant noises. Anyone interested on the Dilophosaurus, which I'm going to wreck for you in a minute? That roar was created by combining howler monkeys, hawk screeches, rattlesnake hisses, and swan calls.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool stuff. But if you want me to touch on the Dilophosaurus a little bit more,
please do.
One of the scariest dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, right? Spits at you, deadly venom. It's going to eat you. It's got terrifying rattling neck frills.
It does. Those neck frills, Dan. They're so iconic. You know, when Nedry falls down the bank, isn't it? It's all raining and he gets mud in his eyes and he can't see what he's doing, and then he hears this. I guess it sounds a little bit like a Gremlin. You know, the 80s horror tongue-in-cheek B-movie type film, Gremlins?
Yeah, I remember.
Lovable, kind of makes squeaky noises. This thing was making squeaky noises. I thought, okay, I'm okay. Just need to get the sample, the dinosaur DNA sample, and get it away to sell it. And he looks up and there's this thing looking at him, and then the frills come out. And it's, again, one of those just fantastic scenes, because you don't get to see too much of the dinos too much in the film, actually, up until that point, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, it's such a I don't want to use the term again, but it is such an iconic kind of scene that's just synonymous with the film.
Well, this is where I shatter yours, our listeners, and I even shattered my own memories of this dinosaur. Michael Crichton, the author of the original novel, invented the dino's deadly venom spitting ability. Spielberg added the terrifying rattling neck frill.
No.
In real life, the Dilophosaurus didn't have either of those traits. So if you grew up watching this film, you now will think differently when you watch it again.
It's all a lie.
It was all a lie.
That's just... And it's so...
Sad.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's artistic license, right? And it kind of works. And the scene wouldn't be the same without those two elements. And true enough, in the latter films, Jurassic World, they do create and splice their own. So it's not as though this hasn't been done before. It's just, yeah, you know, you had the toys. Well, I don't know about you, Dan, but I had the toys when I was growing up, and you had the books, and not once do they say that any of that was made up. Obviously, the dinosaur existed, but obviously, as you say, it's not quite the way that Hollywood depicted. I just feel lied to, Dan. I feel dirty. My life is a lie.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys and girls. but it's true. Sad reacts.
Absolute poo. Well, Dan, talking of poo, right? So the Triceratops dung. So about halfway through the film, and the whole merry gang are going across their way, across the paddocks, and seeing all of the dinosaurs. There is a particular scene where the Triceratops is lying on its side, a little bit poorly, isn't it, Dan? And breathing quite heavily, quite laboured, and there's poo around everywhere. Well, the dung was covered in flies. It's poo, right? And flies love that stuff. Apparently, in order to get, this is just to show just how attention to detail this film was. In order to depict the fact that it was dinosaur poo, they made it look so. I can't even believe I'm saying this on podcast, but to make it look so convincing, and the actors react to it so believably, they actually combined it with clay, mud, and straw to give it the colour and consistency. And then, in order to attract the flies, they then drizzled honey and papayas on it. So there's absolute swarms. So it's a dinner buffet for all those insects that think that they're going to be attracted to some dinosaur poo buffet, right? And of course, having a bunch of flies buzzing around obviously made it more realistic. But at least the good news was it was largely odorless for the actors. It wasn't actual dinosaur poo, right? So there's something to be had for that. But yeah, even to the detail of the dinosaur excrement, did they actually have to think about how they could try and make it look good for the silver screen. And so they had to attract flies. And you just think that, again, that's someone's job. So when you wake up in the morning, Dan, you think, right, this is what I'm going to go and do when I go into the office, or when I'm going to log on at work. I think, what calls I'm going to have and what conversations do I need to get through. Someone's legitimate job was, how can I make sure this poo looks legit and I can get flies? I mean, just it's amazing. I'm not demeaning. Look, that's a cool job to be able to bring kind of a concept to reality. So by no means am I knocking it. It's just a very odd concept, but nonetheless very, very cool. And that's the Triceratops dung, Dan.
Well, I can actually touch a little bit more on our little mate Trikey there. If you've read the novel by Michael Crichton, it's actually a Stegosaurus.
Oh,
but in the film we don't get an explanation why it's ill. So I have an explanation.
Oh yeah.
It is explained that the dino lacks suitable teeth for chewing, and so, like birds, would swallow rock and use them to grind food in its digestive tract. Mm-hmm. After 6 weeks, the rocks would become too smooth to be useful, and the animal would regurgitate them. When finding new rocks to use, the Triceratops also swallowed toxic berries.
Oh dear.
So just a little fun fact for you there. So that's sort of more covered in the book than the film. But I suppose when you've got all the action going on, you've got the Rexy scene coming up. I mean, you don't want to drag that bit out for too long.
You ain't got time to talk about a dinosaur's diet, have you, Dan? You just want to see the teeth and the dung. But look, guys, it's not the first time you've learnt with us. We're bringing you all of the important paleontological facts. Is that a thing? Let's go with that. We're going to go with that. Long, big words. Yeah. Now, I mentioned this before. I wanted to talk about the dinosaur footage. So, I mean, if you've listened to our anniversary, was it 25 years anniversary review we did?
It was, yeah, back in 2018. One of our early episodes back in the weekly roundup days.
It was, and it was released in the cinema, wasn't it? And we went for my birthday back in November 2018, and it was awesome. It was so good, and it spun the Mandela effect, and some other things. There were scenes we couldn't remember, but we saw on the screen, and it was all very odd. And again, I'll put that link in below. We talked a lot about Mandela effect. It's had quite a big impact on our lives, it seems. But one of the things I talked about in that review was that the entire Jurassic Park film runs for 2 hours and 7 minutes. Okay, Dan. So later on this evening, when you're introducing the film, to Claire's niece. She only has to sit through 2 hours and 7 minutes. But apparently, the dinosaurs only really appear for approximately 15 minutes combined for the whole.
That's nuts.
Whole 2 hours.
That feels a lot longer than 15 minutes, especially when you sort of think about everything that's going on. Like you've got the raptors in the kitchen, you've got Rexy attacking the jeeps, you've got Trikey, you've got the Brachiosaurus at the start. It feels a lot longer than that.
Mm. And to that effect, I mean, in Jaws, there are very few shots of the shark. But yet you're aware of the shark's presence throughout the film with the music. So obviously music plays a bigger part in that film. Anyway, you get the idea. And what Spielberg wanted to do was to bring that kind of that sense of dread, kind of out of shot, but you still know it's there type-esque experience. Of course, there was a lot more dinosaur footage than shark footage, but he still used that technique. And he refers to it's the over there, I can hear it breathing, but I'm not necessarily seeing it type technique. So yeah, it's a very, very painfully short amount of time. And the next one I'll talk about after you, Dan, is a particular grisly ending, but actually you don't see it. And a lot of things are inferred. That's probably the best part about it, because it can be quite a horror-filled film, but you don't really see the horror elements. It leaves a lot to the imagination, and again, we talk about that in the film review. I think that's just why this film's so magical, because when you do see them, they look real because someone spent days and nights playing guitar trying to recreate an effect, trying to attract flies to pretend dinosaur poo, and has climbed inside of a big animatronic and grazed the jaws of death, quite literally. So it's when it needs to matter, it really does come through. But it's phenomenal, just when you start thinking about exactly what they delivered and how they did it. But yeah, 15 minutes, Dan, no less.
I want to talk about a little bit about the effects. So to create realistic dinosaurs, the effects artists actually had to get into character. So I'm going to take you a little bit more into depth with this. So the digital artists took video of themselves acting like the Gallimimus herd for reference before they animated the stampede scene.
No way.
Yeah, it helped them create more realistic, instinctive behaviour. Meanwhile, Stan Winston's crew built raptor suits, which they actually had to get into. I mean, if you sort of dive into the Google images and you look this up, you can actually see them in these like rubber raptor suits, especially for, I think it was pictures I found for The Lost World, which is quite cool. Some of the shots of the velociraptors in the climatic kitchen scene were actually achieved by animators wearing those suits.
And this isn't new stuff. I mean, Andy Serkis, who's now like the go-to for CGI and embodying the characters and animals, he's done these things before. He was obviously building upon what has already been done years before, right? In films done recently. I didn't realize that they'd done that. That's awesome. And it is. So what were these actual paleontologists, or were they just like art directors who were just trying to understand kind of? Do you know like what their role was in terms of the whole film?
I'm not too sure. I didn't sort of really look into it into too much depth, which I'm sort of a little bit disappointed myself now. Now we're sort of talking about it, but it's just fascinating seeing these people in these suits walking around, which is quite cool. But maybe I'll try and find an answer for our next episode. But more on the actual sort of advanced sort of computer animated graphics in this film. We've resurrected all the manner of extinct creatures, making the dinosaurs walk and roar. But there's an accident that happens. So I'm going to refer to the scene where Lex falls through the ceiling. Now, Ariana Rich's stunt double, who is obviously sort of falling through the ceiling, she looks directly up at the camera. So what they had to do was CGI paste Rich's face over hers to cover up the error.
That's crazy.
Yeah, no, that's cool. But I mean, that sort of rounds up the effect side for me. But I'm going to try and find an answer for the Raptors for our next episode, I think.
Yeah. Well, I just got. I think it's one more thing, Dan. I think. No, two more things. I referred to this before. The horror plays quite an important part. It's quite. You'd never say Jurassic Park is a horror. Okay, you say it's a thriller or an action or whatever, but there are elements of horror in it. I think we both agree, right?
Yeah.
And one of the particular scenes was Samuel L. Jackson. So Samuel L. Jackson is a well celebrated actor in Hollywood. And he got a relatively big break in the early 90s with this particular film, as he plays the role of Arnold. So he's like the tech guru and ends up selflessly, saving the day whilst being at the jaws of a velociraptor. Now, he's killed off screen. So what we find is Ellie, when she's going, I think she's trying to restore some power, isn't it? When she goes with him to like an outbuilding or something, try and get the power back on, and they both run to this building. They get split up, and she later finds him. I think she finds him because she's backed into a corner, and she feels his arm on her shoulder, and she's reassured that he's there, and she turns around, and it's just an arm, and he's been bitten off. But you don't obviously see him, and you don't see him come to his peril. Now, apparently, the character was originally supposed to have a real death scene, and Samuel Jackson, being just how cool he is, apparently was really excited to do it because he'd been called to be chased by raptors and torn to shreds, he says. Of course, that's the kind of thing that he would say. Now, the aforementioned hurricane, Dan, this really caused a lot of problems during production and post. Now, apparently, Jackson was ready to fly out to Hawaii to actually shoot his character to death when the hurricane destroyed the set and the scene. Had to be scrapped. So he's all ready to go. He's really hyped to be, eaten by a prehistoric animal, and it couldn't happen. So what they did, they just obviously got someone in the special effects department to rustle up alarm, slapped on some fake blood, and we have now what is Ellie finding the severed arm of Arnold. And I'm in two minds about it. I mean, look, Samuel Jackson, just to cover this off, he gets his payoff when he does Deep Blue Sea, late 90s, which is the silly kind of B movie, Jurassic Park of the water, where sharks who are, have you seen this one, Dan? They're being tested upon to be ultra intelligent to try and find this new drug for brain disease, and they become too intelligent and start hunting people down, but in a really intelligent fashion. And he ends up, again, another iconic scene for the actor addressing the surviving cast. We're going to do it. We're going to rise above. We're going to survive. These are just dumb sharks. And then halfway through, he's literally interrupted and eaten. The shark jumps up out of the water, swallows him whole, and goes back. Have you seen that scene?
No. I think this is one of those films from the 90s I need to sort of watch and educate myself.
Mate, it's not that good, but it is good, if that makes any sense. It's a terrible film, but it's just great because it's so terrible. And Deep Blue Sea has feels of The Abyss, which is a late 80s, early 90s film. That's, again, a sci-fi kind of horror thriller, but that's really good. I think that's Spielberg as well, actually. Shock. With Jurassic Park, and it's those two elements, but it plays out underneath the sea. There's an underwater base. Anyway, very, very good. So he does get munched by a dinosaur type monster later on, but yeah, he never got that scene, and I think it's okay. I think it'd be quite gratuitous to kind of see him be torn to shreds, whereas you kind of get the chomping scene with the blood-sucking lawyer in a toilet. I think that's enough. I think any more, they'd probably in reality have to create, to bump that 12A up probably. And I think that would have been a crying shame, because I think it's a tongue-in-cheek as a family film, but I think if you did it, I don't think it'd be worthy of increasing that certificate just to see Samuel L. Jackson die. Sorry, Sam. I like you, but I don't like you enough to be able to break that certificate. So yeah, he wasn't supposed to die that way, but I don't think it's a bad thing, really.
No.
Sure. And then I've got one more, Dan. But did you say you got any more? Got any more facts?
Well, I've got a lot about casting, which we'll sort of touch upon in a minute, and I'll probably throw some questions at you. But I've actually got a reason behind the monochrome clothing of Ian Malcolm and John Hammond. So obviously they find themselves at loggerheads during some of the scenes of Jurassic Park over InGen's research. It's interesting to note then that the pair wore opposite coloured clothes during the film's 2-hour runtime. You've got Ian Malcolm, who's dressed in all black, and you've got John Hammond dressed in white. So the story goes that Spielberg and Crichton saw the duo as representations of themselves, with Spielberg's positive and idealistic approach resembling Hammond, hence the white garments. And then you got Crichton, who was quite cynical and scientific, and he feels like he was defined by Ian Malcolm and his black dress code, shall I say. So in short, I've just put a little TLDR in my notes. During production of the film, Spielberg identified himself as Hammond, the dreamer, and then the author, Michael Crichton, as Malcolm, the voice of reason.
Wow. And there's almost like, I guess, some symbolism, isn't there, for like yin and yang. And they come in opposite directions, but they still kind of have an interesting kind of relationship. I never thought of it like that, Dan. What is that? That's a legitimate thing, I guess, that they actually consciously put that in there.
Legitimate thing.
Well, that's interesting that they went to that degree. The final thing I was going to talk about, Dan, was last one up for me, is that you hear most of the time of production being delayed. I mean, look at the world now. Mostly everything's delayed in the world of entertainment, and for a good reason. I understand that. But in a normal, inverted commas, kind of world, production wouldn't ordinarily finish on time. Usually they overrun, much to people's expense or otherwise. But Jurassic Park being such a massive production, it was a minor miracle. It actually wrapped principal photography 12 days early, Dan.
Really? Considering there was the hurricane?
100%. Now, as much as things changed on the set, Steven Spielberg apparently is a meticulous planner. And he would create scale models or versions of scenes, and he'd use a lipstick camera to find angles that he'd want to shoot. So actually he did all of the hard work, understood exactly how he wanted to look. He almost did a dry run in kind of model form. So actually when it came to play it out, there was only the odd mistake of human error. And actually he managed to squeeze all of that kind of that buffered time of, reshoots and the rest of it, because he'd already done it a couple of times over in the comfort of his own home or dressing room. So yeah, 12 days down, which is fantastic. So yeah, not all films overrun, but because Spielberg is literally the king of cinema, or was, they finished ahead of time.
Wow, he smashed it out of the park.
Indeed.
So I'm going to round it up with just talking about a little bit of the casting, and then I've got one final fun fact for everyone, which I thought was quite clever.
Cool.
So let's start off with Richard Attenborough. Jurassic Park actually brought him out of retirement. He was actually on a 15-year hiatus from acting when Spielberg approached him about taking a role in Jurassic Park. Attenborough had actually, at the time, been directing Gandhi, which beat Spielberg's E.T. for Best Director and Best Picture at the 55th Academy Awards. But he said he agreed to end his semi-retirement because Spielberg had, quote, the charm of the devil.
Wow.
Do you know any other names that were up for casting in Jurassic Park, Alex?
I don't, Dan, but something tells me they're going to be some household names that narrowly missed out.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong there. During the casting of Jurassic Park, William Hurt turned down the role of Alan Grant without reading the script, and Harrison Ford also turned the role down. Other actors considered for Alan Grant were Richard Dreyfuss, Tom Sizemore, and Dylan McDermott.
Richard Dreyfuss, I think, would have been good. I don't think I would have had any of the other ones. just because they're probably more common and more around at that point. And I think it would have taken something away from the film. But I didn't know that. It makes sense, right? You always have like the popular names in the frame, but I think that they took to the role so well, did the cast that it ended up with. I can't think of anyone in there who was a poor casting, in my opinion. I think it was all perfectly selected.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Sean Connery was actually first sought for the role of John Hammond. Whilst we had several actresses all tested for the role of Ellie Sattler, and this includes Sandra Bullock, Gwyneth Paltrow, Robin Wright Penn, Terry Hatcher, Julianne Moore, Helen Hunt, Elizabeth Hurley, and last but not least, Juliette Binoche.
I mean, Julianne Moore, I think, could have been quite good, but again, she was doing Silence of the Lambs. I think she could have been too obvious. So again, I think they needed to have lesser known actresses to play it. Otherwise, I think it would have kind of taken something away from the film. Do you know what I mean? Like, the stars of the film were the dinosaurs and the storyline. I don't think you need to have. I mean, Jeff Goldblum had done things like The Fly, I think, at that point, and other kind of side films, and he was known, but I don't think at the time he was like such a big Hollywood actor as he's been celebrated now. So I think you had to have people coming up so that they weren't kind of stealing the limelight, because the magic of cinema was that film. It wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't the actors. They did a good job, but it was the storyline and the cinematography, the animatronics, which really did it for me.
Yeah. Also, lastly, Christina Ricci actually auditioned to play as Lex. She was quite a big actress back in the 90s, but she seems to have fallen off the face of the planet since.
Yeah, she did things like Casper, I think, a couple of years later.
Yeah, she did.
She could have been a good choice, but again, I think they nailed the casting for what they ended up with.
Well, it's a bit of a fun one for you as well. So in Michael Crichton's original novel, he specifically mentions that the Jurassic Park audio tour is narrated by Golden Globe winning actor Richard Kiley. So what did Spielberg do? He hired Kiley to provide the voiceover in the park vehicles.
No way.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool, man. It's just really the little things, isn't it?
I wonder, though, whether that was like a way for them to negotiate some of the artistic license which Spielberg was deviated from the book, along with the many ones, including venom spitting frilly dinosaurs. But that is cool. That's a nice touch.
But let's talk about Jeff Goldblum for a second.
Yeah, let's. What a fantastic, fascinating guy.
He very nearly missed out playing Dr. Ian Malcolm. I mean, Spielberg, if he had opted for the casting director Janet Hirschon's other choice for the role, it could have been Jim Carrey. He was actually the front runner for the part after he had performed well during the audition phase, but Hirschon actually eventually pushed for Goldblum. So we could have had a very different iteration of Jurassic Park, Dr. Ian Malcolm, and actually The Lost World, which is sort of driven by Ian Malcolm.
I just think the dry, kind of sarcastic sense of humour of Goldblum and the way he kind of portrays that character, I mean, I haven't read the book, but I think it's so well executed. Jim Carrey slapstick. I just can't think of any conceivable way that he'd be able to do that job or that role justice, which is harsh, but I can't do any better, right? I'm not an actor, but that's not what Jim Carrey does. Jim Carrey does over the top, flamboyant, witty, but that's not the kind of what we know as Dr. Ian Malcolm now. It's very dry, intelligent, and cutting, and I don't think he could quite command the script in a way which Goldblum did.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine Jim Carrey doing the famous open shirt scene, the one where I think they famously made the GIF now, where They've got Dr. Grant on the stomach where he's breathing up and down.
Yeah. The sexy Jeff Goldblum.
I just can't imagine Jim Carrey doing it. And to be honest, I know you're not a fan of Lost World, Alex, but I mean, I like it. I just can't imagine that film being driven by Jim Carrey. It just wouldn't work.
No, agreed.
Another little fun fact, actually, between the actors. I mean, you've got the clear spark between Ellie Sattler and Dr. Ian Malcolm when he's talking about the chaos theory. And they're flirting outrageously in front of Dr. Alan Grant. Well, there's a reason that the two seem so well suited. Jeff Goldblum and Laura Dern actually got engaged after Jurassic Park and stayed engaged for 2 years before eventually splitting up.
No way.
Yeah, it's the little things, isn't it? It's just, this is what makes this podcast so interesting. Sort of dive in a little bit. You find all these fun facts, and I sort of feel like I've been educated myself with research about one of my favourite films.
Yeah, you just got to be careful though. When you watch it a little bit later on, Dan, you can't be talking over it and say, "Oh yeah, did you know about this? And did you know about that?" Which is going to be really tough. But otherwise, you're going to ruin the experience for everyone else in the room. But that's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. But I've got one cool Easter egg just to round this episode off nicely.
Shoot.
Cool little Easter egg. So the Velociraptors. This is the geekiest Easter egg you'll ever hear me talk about. So during one climatic scene when the cast try to escape via the ceiling duct, one Velociraptor stands in front of a projection of a repeating sequence of the letters A, C, T, and G. The letters stand for amino acids adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine, the 4 base proteins that make up DNA. Mic drop.
Wow. That is geeky.
Yeah. Nerdy. I didn't even know that. Like, I've always seen it in the films. Like, what is that projection on its face? It makes no sense, but I found my answer researching this episode.
And you can now rest in peace. Well, I'm going to probably do one better, Dan. Let's bring the tone back down from the academic that you brought it up to. We didn't talk about this, but I think we did in our review. The sound of the velociraptors talking to one another, the raspy bark, right? When they're communicating, coordinating the attack in and around the complexes of InGen and the park itself. You know, the kind of sound, right? You remember that one?
I do, yeah.
Well, that sound, they obviously haven't got velociraptors. They took it from tortoises having sex, Dan.
No way.
100%. So when tortoises are getting it on, getting down and dirty, jumping on the good foot and doing the bad thing, and all the other kind of ways to describe having sex, it was tortoises, and that is the legit sound of a tortoise making sweet love. So if you don't take anything away from this episode, guys, the final parting gift to you, you can bring this out at any kind of dinner party, bar mitzvah, wedding, whatever. You can say, guys, interesting fact, Jurassic Park, the raptors is the sound of tortoises having sex. And I say to you, you're welcome. We are here to serve your pointless facts at social gatherings, and there you go. That sounds a bit wraps us up, Dan.
It does. I mean, that's fantastic. I didn't know that. Definitely going to tell my friends about tortoises having sex and how it makes up the noise of a raptor.
Yeah,
amazing.
The joke will be on you if you don't use that one, Dan. But if we've missed any, I'm sure there's plenty out there because it is a magical film. Or perhaps if people wanted us to cover any other kind of behind the scenes they think is worthy, we've got some brand new, very simple contact details, Dan, haven't we?
We do. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on @onthetopicpod. And then we've got Gmail, which is onthetopicpodcast@gmail.com. And alternatively, if you really want to be a part of the show, which we do, because This is your views, your podcast. We want your wonderful voice. In most social media drops we always leave a link to our Anchor page where you can click on that, accept the microphone on your mobile phone, and just talk to us.
You can, yeah. Leave a voice message, and we can literally, as we've done from other listeners in previous episodes before, you can be part of the show. So do get in touch. All of the details are in the descriptions below, all the contact details. Get in touch and let us know. Alternatively, it doesn't have to be anything of what I've just said. It can be anything from previous episodes. So I've looked and I've seen that a lot of people are looking at our back catalogue. So if there's something that you wanted to comment on or let us know or give us some insight of, please get in touch and give us a heads up, and we'll be more than happy to include it in another upcoming episode. But on upcoming episodes, Dan, we've got our favourite films as the next one, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going to be delving into our favourite noughties films. And I suppose we'll start looking at new content to push and keep an eye on those socials, and we'll go from there.
Smashing stuff.
Got a big list.
We have. So yeah, get in touch and let us know, and you can help drive the content. But from perilous animatronic T-Rexes to rippling waters to horrific hurricanes and to grisly deaths, for another week, I've been Alex.
And from being dino food to avoiding hydraulics crushing my poor bones, I've been Dan.
And we'll see you next week.
Bloopers.
That's my really bad impression of a dinosaur.
I love it. Incredible.